Welcome to the Sustainable Consumption Teaching Series. My name's Gordon Walker from the Demand Centre at Lancaster University in the UK. I'm going to talk to you about sustainable consumption and energy justice. So what is energy justice? Well, in some ways it's nothing special. It's just about saying that justice is relevant to how we think about energy and the development and changing profile of our energy systems as we try and deal with climate change. So it's about saying that justice is relevant right across the chain from energy production and all the component parts of energy production, including things like mining and so on, through all the distribution of energy and the electricity systems and gas networks and so on, and right through into energy consumption and the patterns of energy demand that we live with and the way that energy is part of our everyday lives. So when we say that justice is relevant, it's about saying, well, how does all of that, how does that entire energy system have implications for the environment? Yes. But in particular, how does that have implications for the quality of people's lives, their well-being, their health? And that would give attention to not only how people's health and well-being is damaged by energy systems, but also how it's enhanced by the way of living with energy demand, with consuming energy. It ultimately brings well-being and good things into our lives. So that's broadly the scope of energy justice. It touches lots of different questions that we might have about the future of our energy systems, particularly as we move to a low carbon form. But what sort of things can we think about when we take on that word justice? Now there's many hundreds, if not thousands of years of discussion about the meaning of justice and how we mobilise that as an idea. There are some meanings of justice which are very distributional, and that tends to be how immediately people think about justice and social justice and environmental justice in particular. It's about the distribution of who gets what, who gets the bad things, who gets the good things, and the sort of patterns of inequality that there are in distributional terms. But there are other meanings of justice as well. There's procedural justice, which is about participation and who is involved in decision making, who has influence, who is excluded from sitting around the table and discussing how energy systems should evolve in the future. And also justice as recognition, which some people argue is the most fundamental meaning of justice, which is to do with who is respected, who is stigmatized, who is discriminated against. So it brings in the sort of fundamentals of things like gender discrimination, religious discrimination, ethnic discrimination, and so on. And those three meanings of justice are very much interrelated. It's important to take on board. They're not sort of alternatives. They're often mobilised in a very sort of connected way. So if you're not recognised, you don't participate. If you don't participate, the decisions that are made about how goods and bads are distributed are unlikely to be in your favour. So that's energy justice and justice. How is this all relevant to sustainable consumption, which is clearly what this teaching series is about? Well, first of all, sustainable consumption, to some degree, is about arguments that we should be consuming less, that overall, globally, there is too much consumption, particularly in the form of modern Western economy that I live in and where I am at the moment in Switzerland. So that sort of sense of sustainable consumption needing to engage with overconsumption, I think, is very strong. But what justice says is that we can't just talk about overconsumption, because there are many in the world that are consuming insufficiently, that they aren't consuming sufficiently to have a healthy life, to flourish and to have well-being. And that's certainly true in terms of energy. So simultaneously we can be talking about the need to cut down energy consumption by some, but bring up the levels of energy consumption for others. And that may be people living in the developing world in the global south, but it can also be people who are poor and deprived in countries like the UK, where we talk about fuel poverty as a phenomenon, which is people being unable to consume sufficient levels of energy, or I'd actually say energy services, something like heat or light and cooling, in order to sustain their well-being. So that bringing in of justice means that we're very conscious of the relationship between bringing down consumption for some, bringing up consumption for others, and the inequalities that are there for a fundamental part of finding that balance between those two moves. Another way that justice is relevant to sustainable consumption is when we talk about consuming better. So to some degree, sustainable consumption is about consuming less, but it's also about consuming better. We might mean more sustainably, more ethically, more of a low carbon pattern of consumption could be another way that we would say that consumption can be better. Well, justice would say that that move to consuming better isn't just something for the privileged elite who are already consuming a lot. It should also be about the consumption that we want more of for the poor and deprived in the world, that they should be consuming more, but also consuming better. And in energy terms, that means that when we're talking about improving access to energy and energy services for those who have insufficient, that what we should be doing is bringing the best forms of energy technology, the most efficient forms of energy consumption, and the best forms of energy service to those people, rather than seeing those moves towards a more efficient, lower carbon energy system just being the privilege of those in richer countries. That means pursuing policies of energy transition which absolutely take on the need to bring better forms of energy consumption to the lives and the worlds of those that are living in a more deprived and a poorer way. A couple of other ways in which sustainable consumption and energy justice are related. I would say that when we think about justice as recognition, it means that we need to think about the way that religious, cultural, ethnic and gender difference is relevant to the ways in which people currently live with energy and the sorts of changes that we're trying to achieve for the future. So making sure that we don't embed forms of discrimination and disrespect into the future energy systems that we have, rather than just reproducing those sort of phenomena as they are already distributed across society. And lastly, it's relevant to how we are thinking about decision-making processes for future energy systems. So when we are thinking about change and redesign and consuming less, consuming more, consuming better and so on, who's involved in developing those strategies of change? And making sure that it's not just the voices of the privileged few and the elite and the politically powerful, but that we have mechanisms whereby those who are less traditionally well positioned to have a say and to have influence are included in those decision-making processes, so that the sorts of transitions that we have are distributionally fairer, they're procedurally fairer, and they take on the need to recognise the multiple differentiated voices that there are in the modern world.